"You're coming with me," the loner rancher said, stepping in when a widow was brutalized in a western town. The small town sat in the middle of the frontier, far from the core worlds, where the grid of law and protection barely reached. Its buildings were worn, the paint peeling from sun and wind, and the metal signs creaked in the dry breeze. Few people remained in Dustfall Crossing these days. Those who had stayed were either too stubborn or too desperate to leave. Among the few who walked the streets that evening was Mara Ellison. She moved carefully, balancing a small basket of supplies in her hands. Her long hair was tied back with a strip of cloth, and her eyes, sharp and bright, scanned the streets with cautious determination. Mara had been a widow for 2 years now. Her husband had died in a farming accident on the outskirts of the town, leaving her alone with the small water reclamation station they had built together. It wasn't much, but it had kept her alive, kept the people of Dustfall Crossing supplied with the precious liquid that their desert world often lacked. As Mara approached the market square, she noticed a small crowd gathered near the office of the local trade syndicate. Their attention was fixed on something, or someone, in the center. Her stomach twisted. She recognized some of the enforcers from the syndicate, tall men in dark jackets with badges stamped with the corporate logo. They were speaking to a woman older than Mara, a widow like herself, though less fortunate. The woman's face was pale, her shoulders trembling. She was being accused, it seemed, of failing to meet her debts, of mismanaging her resources. Mara slowed her pace, instinctively taking cover behind a barrel. She didn't want to get involved. She had learned long ago that people who tried to stop the syndicate often paid the price. Yet as she watched, she realized the town wasn't intervening. No one spoke up. No one stepped forward. The people of Dustfall Crossing had grown used to the quiet intimidation, the way the syndicate could take what they wanted without lifting a hand. Some of the town's residents looked away. Others, she noticed, whispered excuses to themselves, justifying their silence. The widow's voice trembled as she spoke, barely loud enough for anyone to hear. I tried to, I didn't mean. You didn't pay on time. You don't own this station anymore, one of the enforcers said, his tone calm but final. Your contract is void, you will leave, now. No one in the crowd reacted, not a word, not a step. Mara felt her chest tighten. This wasn't right. People were supposed to help each other in the frontier. They were supposed to protect one another, especially when danger came not from alien creatures or rogue storms, but from other humans exploiting weakness. Just then, a figure emerged from the edge of the street, walking with a slow, deliberate gait. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself as though he belonged to no one but himself. His hat shaded his face, but Mara could see the glint of determination in his eyes. He was a stranger to the town, but there was something about him that made the syndicate men pause, if only slightly. He stepped forward and the crowd instinctively moved aside. The stranger didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. He simply said in a voice that was calm, quiet, yet carried the weight of certainty, "You're coming with me." Mara froze. The widow, confused and frightened, looked at the stranger, and for a moment the enforcers themselves seemed uncertain. They had expected defiance from the widow, not intervention. The stranger repeated, more firmly this time, "Come with me, now." The widow hesitated, glancing at the crowd, then at Mara. Mara's heart was pounding. She wanted to step forward to help, but she didn't know what she could do. Yet the stranger's presence seemed to shift the air. There was a quiet authority in him that made even the enforcers pause, as though some unseen boundary had been crossed. Finally, the widow nodded slowly. She followed him, walking past the stunned enforcers, past the murmuring townspeople who had only just begun to notice what was happening. They didn't interfere. No one shouted. No one tried to stop them. It was as if everyone in Dustfall Crossing had forgotten how to act on courage. The stranger led her away from the market square, down a side street lined with abandoned shops and shuttered windows. The crowd thinned quickly, and soon they were alone in the dusty paths between buildings. The sun dipped lower, bathing the street in orange and red, and the quiet of the town seemed almost heavy. "I'm Caleb Rourke," the stranger said, his voice carrying over the quiet. "I saw what was happening back there. You shouldn't have to go through that alone." The widow, still shaking slightly, tried to speak, but no words came. Mara watched, a mixture of relief and curiosity rising in her chest. Caleb wasn't just a passerby. He seemed prepared. "I don't know where you're taking me," the widow finally said, "and I don't even know you." "You don't need to," Caleb replied. "Just trust me. You're safe with me. I know a place where the syndicate can't reach you, where you can start again." The widow nodded, though her hands trembled as she clutched the basket she had been holding. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but something in Caleb's steady presence told her that, at the very least, he would not abandon her. They walked through the empty streets, past the half-collapsed saloon, past the general store with its cracked windows, and toward the edge of town. Dust swirled around their feet, and the sound of the town faded behind them, replaced by the quiet hum of the desert wind. Mara couldn't help but glance back at the market square one last time. The crowd was dispersing, the enforcers had returned to their offices, and life in Dustfall Crossing seemed to go on as though nothing had happened. Yet, for Mara, something had changed. She had witnessed the quiet courage of one man stepping in when the world looked away. As the sun set completely, Caleb led them out of town and toward the barren lands beyond, where the air was fresher, the shadows longer, and the world felt wider. "We'll reach my place before night fully falls," he said, glancing down at the widow. "You'll see it's not much, but it's safe, and it's yours to decide what comes next." Mara felt a flicker of hope. She had been on her own for too long. She had survived, yes, but only barely. And now, for the first time in months, she felt the possibility that she might not have to survive alone anymore. Caleb didn't speak much as they walked, but his quiet confidence spoke volumes. Mara and the widow followed him, keeping pace, and each step away from Dustfall Crossing felt like a small reclaiming of dignity. The world was vast, wild, and unpredictable, but Caleb seemed to move through it as if he belonged to it, rather than it belonging to him. By the time the suns had fully set, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and gold, they reached the outskirts where Dustfall Crossing gave way to open desert. Caleb stopped and turned to face them. "This is where we start," he said simply. "It won't be easy. The frontier never is, but I promise you no one will force you back into that town, not while I'm here." The widow looked at him, eyes wide but resolute. Mara saw a spark in her gaze that had been missing for days, perhaps weeks, a spark of determination, a spark of life. Caleb nodded to himself, as if confirming a silent vow. Then, without another word, he led them forward into the unknown lands beyond Dustfall Crossing, toward the promise of safety, resilience, and a new beginning. And as the desert night settled around them, Mara realized that in the vastness of the frontier, humans could stand tall, not with power or weaponry alone, but with courage, kindness, and the willingness to act when the world had looked away. The first steps of their journey had been taken. The future was uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, hope was real. The desert night stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of deep indigo streaked with stars. The twin moons hung low, casting a soft, silver light over the barren landscape. Dustfall Crossing was now a faint memory behind them, a town of quiet whispers and fearful eyes. Mara and the widow, whose name she now learned was Ilara, followed Caleb as he moved with steady purpose, each step confident despite the uneven terrain. "Where are we going?" Mara finally asked, her voice low. She tried not to sound nervous, but the desert stretched so far and wide, it was impossible not to feel small. Caleb glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the moon's light. "Somewhere you can be safe. Somewhere the syndicate's reach doesn't go." Ilara, clutching her small bag tightly, added, "Safe, Does that really exist out here? Caleb gave a small smile, but it was not warm. It was quiet, measured, like someone who had seen too much and learned to rely on preparation over promises. Safe is a word humans define for themselves. Out here, you have to make your own safety. I can help you with that. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of dry soil underfoot and the faint hum of the wind through rocky outcroppings. Mara's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she could see strange desert plants, their leaves glimmering faintly with dew that condensed from the thin air. In some places, small metal devices protruded from the sand, blinking dimly. Caleb noticed her curiosity and nodded toward one of them. "Those are sensors," he explained. "I set them up to monitor the area. For storms, predators, anything that moves. You can't rely on anyone else to warn you out here." Mara looked at him, admiration sparking in her chest. She had survived dustfall crossing through grit, but Caleb, he moved as if he had lived in this desert all his life, though the way he spoke hinted at experience beyond simple ranching. After what felt like hours, the landscape began to shift. The flat desert gave way to gentle hills, dotted with rugged cliffs and small caves. Caleb stopped at the crest of one such rise, turning to face them. "From here you'll see it," he said. Mara and Alara followed his gaze. In the valley below, nestled among rocks and twisted trees, was a small compound. It wasn't large, but it was organized. Simple buildings clustered together, solar panels angled toward the moons, a small wind turbine turning lazily in the night breeze. The lights were soft, warm, inviting. "Caleb's ranch." "It's beautiful," Alara whispered. Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he led them down the slope, moving carefully but quickly. Mara noticed that the path was well worn, almost invisible to the untrained eye, blending naturally with the desert. When they reached the gate of the ranch, Caleb opened it, revealing a small yard where the dust had been swept away, leaving neat paths between the buildings. "This is your new home," Caleb said simply. "For now, anyway." Mara looked around, taking in the simplicity and order. There were tools hung neatly on walls, small gardens protected by wire fencing, and water storage tanks that gleamed in the moonlight. Caleb led them to the largest building, a single-story house with thick walls. Inside, the air smelled of clean wood and dry earth. "You can sleep here tonight," Caleb said, motioning to a pair of bunks in a corner room. "Tomorrow, I'll show you the rest of the ranch. There's work to do, but it's nothing you can't handle." Mara and Alara exchanged glances. The word work sounded like a test, but Caleb's calm assurance made it feel like an invitation rather than a command. Mara felt a spark of hope. She had spent so long surviving, always one step away from losing everything, that the idea of doing something purposeful again was almost dizzying. After they settled in, Caleb led them outside to the main yard. The desert night stretched overhead, filled with stars that seemed impossibly close. He pointed to a small structure near the edge of the compound. "That's the water reclamation system," he said. "It's old, but it works. I modified it so it can handle more than what you'll need. You can expand it if you want." Mara's heart lifted. Her skills, honed in Dustfall Crossing, were suddenly valuable here. For the first time in weeks, she felt useful. Caleb then led them toward another building, one slightly larger than the others, with thick metal shutters. "This is the workshop. Anything you need to fix, build, or create, this is the place. The desert will test you, but preparation is everything." Alara looked around with wide eyes, impressed. "You've built all this alone?" she asked. Caleb shrugged. "Not entirely alone. I've had help before, but most of what you see I did myself. Humans are capable of a lot if they're willing to learn." Mara smiled faintly. "You're right. We survive because we adapt, because we try." Caleb's eyes softened, a brief flicker of approval passing over his face. He didn't say anything else, but Mara felt it. Approval from someone who had seen the desert and its challenges and had survived. The night deepened, and the air grew cooler. They returned to the main house, where Caleb prepared a simple meal of dried protein, nuts, and water. It wasn't much, but it was nourishing. Mara noticed that even in this simplicity there was care. Plates were arranged neatly, portions balanced, water measured carefully. It spoke of a life disciplined by necessity, yet guided by thoughtfulness. As they ate in silence, Mara finally asked the question that had been on her mind since they left Dustfall Crossing. Why help us? You didn't know us, and yet you stepped in. Caleb looked down at his meal, considering. After a moment he said, because someone had to. Because if no one steps in, the frontier loses its meaning. People are not meant to be alone, even here. Alara's eyes shone in the dim light. That's rare. Rare doesn't mean impossible, Caleb replied. And the frontier, it remembers those who act. Humans remember. Even when systems fail, humans survive. That's what I do out here. I survive, and I help others survive. That's all. Mara thought about the people of Dustfall Crossing, the ones who looked away when the widow was humiliated. She felt a mix of anger and sadness. But Caleb's words gave her hope. Humans weren't always silent observers. Some stepped forward. Some acted. Some refused to let injustice stand. After dinner, Caleb showed them the sleeping quarters. The bunks were simple but clean. Blankets were folded neatly at the foot, and small shelves held essentials: lanterns, water flasks, and a few basic tools. Mara and Alara settled in, exhaustion finally catching up with them. Before sleep, Mara stepped outside one last time. The desert night stretched endlessly. The stars twinkled overhead, and she realized just how far from Dustfall Crossing they were. Yet she didn't feel fear. She felt possibility. The world was wild and uncertain, but here she had a chance to rebuild, to reclaim what had been taken. Caleb watched from the doorway, silent, as the two women stood in the night. He didn't intrude. He never intruded. But Mara felt his presence, a calm, steadying force in the vast, unpredictable desert. When she turned back inside, she found Alara already asleep, face relaxed, tension finally gone from her shoulders. Mara lay down beside her, thinking of what Caleb had said. Humans remember. Humans survive. Humans act. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the desert, painting everything in gold. Birds with iridescent feathers circled high above, calling to one another in strange musical tones. Caleb woke them with a simple, firm voice. "Time to see the ranch," he said. They followed him outside, and Mara saw things she had never imagined in the frontier. Automated irrigation, channels-fed gardens planted with hardy crops. Small wind turbines lined the ridges, silently spinning in the wind. At the edge of the property, a small workshop hummed with quiet energy, and various machines and devices were arranged with meticulous care. Caleb walked them through the work, explaining everything in simple terms. This is how you survive. Not with brute force, but with knowledge, with preparation, with cooperation. The desert doesn't care about strength, it cares about readiness. And humans can be ready. Mara nodded, absorbing everything. The HFY truth was clear. Humans were adaptable, capable, and relentless. They didn't need superpowers or alien allies. They had willpower, ingenuity, and the courage to step forward when it mattered most. As the day passed, Mara and Alara helped Caleb with chores, learning the rhythms of the ranch. By evening, they were tired but satisfied. Mara looked over the horizon, where the suns began to set again, and she felt a deep, quiet hope. For the first time in a long while, she felt she belonged somewhere. The frontier was harsh, but with Caleb, with her own skills, and with the quiet strength of humanity, she felt she could face anything. And somewhere deep in the desert, the ranch stood as a small beacon, a place where humans survived, thrived, and acted when others would look away. The days at Caleb's ranch passed quietly but steadily. Mara and Alara woke with the sun, learned the routines of the land, and helped maintain the systems Caleb had built. Water reclamation, solar panels, irrigation channels, Even the sensors scattered across the desert all became part of their new rhythm. The ranch, small as it was, hummed with life and purpose. Mara felt her skills were not only needed but respected, and that respect in itself was rare. Yet, as humans are never alone for long in a connected universe, word of their presence soon reached the syndicate in Dustfall Crossing. One morning, while Mara adjusted a filter on the water system, she noticed Caleb standing at the edge of the property, staring down the desert road. His hat was pulled low, eyes narrowed, and his stance tight with attention. Mara felt the shift immediately. The quiet calm of the ranch had a new edge of tension. "They're coming," Caleb said, his voice low but steady. "The syndicate sent people to retrieve certain property." Mara frowned. "You mean me?" Caleb didn't answer directly. Instead, he began walking toward the workshop, motioning for them to follow. "They won't use weapons. Not yet, but they will use pressure, contracts, threats. The kind humans respect legally, financially, socially. That's how they control people." Ilara's hands trembled slightly as she followed. "So they'll just try to scare us. They'll try to take what they think belongs to them," Caleb said. "But humans are clever. You can't rely on them to act fairly, but you can rely on their systems. Laws, records, rules. Humans built them. Humans can use them. That's how we survive." By late afternoon, two sleek hover cars descended from the ridge, stopping just outside the ranch. From a distance, Mara could see the syndicate envoys, well-dressed, carrying data pads and wearing the polished confidence of those who believed rules and money gave them absolute control. They approached slowly, aware of the ranch's boundaries, and called out, expecting cooperation. Caleb walked forward to meet them, his hands empty, his posture calm. Mara and Ilara stayed behind the line of the workshop, watching. "I'm Caleb Rourke," he said, his voice firm. "You're not taking anyone here, not by force and not by coercion." The tallest envoy, a man with sharp features and a voice trained to command obedience, spoke. "Rourke, the property belongs to the syndicate. That woman, Mara Ellison, is required to return. Her contracts, her resources, all belong to the company." Caleb tilted his head slightly, considering. "Contracts are only valid if freely agreed upon, and she's not free there. She didn't refuse willingly. She was intimidated. You can't force loyalty and you can't force freedom." The envoy hesitated. He hadn't expected argument. He was trained to intimidate and negotiate, but Caleb's presence made him uncertain. Mara felt a rush of pride. This was human ingenuity in action. Not a fight, not a duel, but a careful application of rules, knowledge, and preparation. Caleb continued calmly. "I have the original agreements, signed records, and evidence of coercion. If you pursue this claim, it will be investigated. And it will be very bad for your company." The envoy's confident posture wavered, though he tried to mask it. Mara glanced at Caleb in awe. He had no weapons, no visible leverage, and yet he had the envoy's full attention. Humans could bend even authority when they used knowledge cleverly. Ilara whispered, How do you know all this?" Caleb didn't look at her directly. "I've seen humans abuse systems before. I've studied how they think, how they move. Knowledge is the only tool you need when brute force fails." The tallest envoy sighed and looked to his partner. "Perhaps we should check these documents first. There might be a misunderstanding." "Do that," Caleb said. "But let me make it clear, Mara is not returning. She is free to make her own choices." The envoys exchanged hesitant glances, then retreated to their hovercars. They didn't leave entirely. They hovered nearby, clearly planning their next move. But the immediate threat was gone. Mara felt a mixture of relief and astonishment. Caleb had turned the situation entirely without confrontation. That evening, the ranch settled into calm again. Mara helped Caleb check the water system, maintaining the pipes and filters. Ilara gathered supplies, organizing them with precision, and the trio worked quietly, the desert wind humming around them. "You were amazing today," Mara said, breaking the silence. Caleb glanced up. "Not amazing, just careful. Humans survive by thinking, not by reacting." "You'll learn that if you stay here long enough." Alara nodded, her eyes wide. "It's strange. Back in Dustfall Crossing, people just watched. They didn't act, but you did something. And it worked." Caleb smiled faintly. "Some humans wait until it's too late. Others, when they act, change everything. You've seen the difference." Over the next few days, Mara and Alara began to understand more of the ranch's secrets. There were hidden sensors, automated irrigation channels, and small drones that monitored the perimeter. Caleb showed them how to check the readings, repair minor malfunctions, and anticipate problems. Every lesson reinforced the truth. Humans adapted, humans planned, and humans could turn the environment itself into a shield. Then came the day Caleb decided it was time to teach them the most important lesson. He gathered Mara and Alara near the edge of the ridge, overlooking Dustfall Crossing in the distance. "You see that town?" he asked. "That's a place where people looked away, where fear ruled over courage. You saw what happened to the widow back there. You also saw what happens when someone decides to step in. Humans remember. They respect action. And most importantly, humans can rebuild what is broken if they choose to act." Mara nodded. "But not everyone acts. Not everyone wants to help." "That's true," Caleb said. "But you don't need everyone. You only need enough. You only need yourself and those who choose to stand with you. That's how we survive in the frontier. That's how humans endure." Alara's voice was quiet but firm. "I want to help. I want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." Caleb looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Good. That's the kind of thinking that changes the world. You're not just surviving, you're shaping it." That night, as the twin moons rose high above the ranch, Mara reflected on what had happened. The syndicate envoys were still out there, planning their next move, but she no longer felt helpless. She had skills, knowledge, and the guidance of someone who had mastered survival in the harshest environment. Humans weren't helpless. They adapted, learned, and found solutions where others saw only barriers. The next morning, Mara and Alara began helping Caleb more actively. They repaired sections of fencing, organized supplies, and tended to the water systems. The ranch itself became a classroom, each task a lesson in resilience, ingenuity, and cooperation. Mara discovered that she enjoyed the challenge, the rhythm of work under the hot suns, the satisfaction of seeing a system function properly, the quiet pride in knowing that she was contributing to something larger than herself. One afternoon, while checking a sensor near a distant ridge, Mara noticed movement on the horizon. At first, she thought it might be wildlife, but the shapes moved deliberately humans. She hurried back to the main yard where Caleb was organizing tools. "They're here," she said. Caleb nodded, unflustered. "Yes, they're back to see if intimidation works this time. It rarely does twice with the same people, but we'll be ready. Humans are creative, humans are resilient, and humans don't give up easily when they have something to protect." As the hovercars descended again, Mara felt no fear. Instead, she felt a quiet confidence. Humans were not weak. Humans were not helpless. Humans could face impossible odds and still find solutions, not by brute force but by intelligence, planning, and cooperation. The syndicate envoys approached cautiously, aware that Caleb's ranch was not a place where threats or intimidation worked as easily. Mara and Alara stepped forward, prepared to assist in the defense, not with violence but with knowledge, preparation, and courage. Caleb smiled faintly. "Remember what I taught you. Humans survive because they act, they think, they plan, and sometimes they win by standing firm when others expect them to falter." The envoys stopped a few meters away, reviewing digital documents and contracts, clearly confused by the sheer thoroughness of Caleb's preparation. Mara felt a spark of pride. The human frontier was harsh, yes, but humans had tools even more powerful than weapons: thought, courage, and the will to act. As the sun began to set behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Caleb, Mara, and Alara stood side by side. The ranch, simple and resilient, was more than a home. It was a testament to human ingenuity and determination. The syndicate may have controlled Dustfall Crossing, but here, humans ruled by different laws. The laws of preparation, intelligence, and the refusal to be intimidated. And in that moment, Mara understood what Caleb had meant all along. Humans endure, not because they are the strongest, but because they are willing to act when it matters most. The desert wind carried the distant hum of the hovercars retreating, and Mara realized the next challenge would come, eventually. But she was ready. Humans always found a way. The sun rose slowly over the desert, painting the ranch in warm gold. The twin moons had disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving the land quiet and still. Caleb, Mara, and Alara moved through the compound with practiced efficiency. Pipes were checked, water tanks filled, and the solar panels were adjusted for maximum sunlight. Each small task carried weight, for survival on the frontier was measured not in battles fought, but in preparation and foresight. For Mara, this morning was different. Dustfall Crossing wasn't far from the ridge that overlooked the ranch. From this height she could see the town's small cluster of buildings, the dusty main street, and the slowly waking townspeople. The sight stirred something inside her, an urge she hadn't felt since leaving her home there. The town had been silent, hesitant, and fearful, yet it was full of people who deserved a chance to see things differently. Caleb noticed her gaze. "Thinking about the town?" he asked, his voice calm but knowing. Mara nodded. "I want to help them. Not with force, but maybe with hope, maybe with proof that they can stand for themselves." Caleb regarded her for a moment, then nodded. "The frontier remembers. Humans remember. They remember the ones who act when others do not. If we do this right, Dustfall Crossing will remember the choice to act, and it will change them." Alara adjusted her scarf, looking nervous. "But they might not listen. They've stayed quiet for so long. Fear is heavy." "Fear only controls those who let it," Caleb replied. "Humans endure because they choose action. Sometimes that means small steps. Sometimes it means standing in front of the town and showing them that change is possible." Later that day, Mara and Alara accompanied Caleb down the ridge toward the town. They traveled on a narrow path, moving quietly but deliberately. Mara's heart raced. She hadn't been in Dustfall Crossing since leaving, and the thought of seeing the streets, the townspeople, and the syndicate offices again filled her with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As they approached the edge of town, a few townspeople noticed them. They stopped in their daily routines, whispers passing from one to another. It had been weeks since anyone had dared to leave the protective shadows of the town for the open desert. Caleb stepped forward, confident but not threatening. Mara and Alara followed closely, keeping their movements measured. The people of Dustfall Crossing hesitated, unsure whether to flee or to watch. The syndicate enforcers appeared briefly, observing the newcomers with curiosity, but no one intervened yet. Caleb raised his hand slightly, signaling a greeting. "People of Dustfall Crossing," he began, voice carrying clearly over the small square. "I come not to take from you. I come to show that humans can act when others look away. You saw what happened to Mara Ellison. You watch fear control your streets, but fear does not have to rule you. Humans remember, humans endure, and humans can choose to do what is right." A silence followed. For a moment the town seemed frozen, unsure whether to respond. Mara felt a stirring of courage. She stepped forward beside Caleb. "They took my home. They tried to control my life," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "I am alive because someone chose to act. You do not need to wait for someone else. You can stand. You can protect each other. You can make Dustfall Crossing more than a place where fear rules." Whispers began among the townspeople. Some shook their heads, unwilling to believe it could be true. Others, eyes wide, saw a spark of hope, a vision of a town where humans worked together instead of turning away. Caleb nodded to Mara and Alara. You see, humans remember those who act. And humans are strongest when they choose to act together. You do not need anyone else to tell you what is right. You already know. Slowly, a few townspeople began to step forward. First, a shopkeeper who had always kept quiet, then a mechanic, a farmer, and a teacher. Each took small, deliberate steps toward the center of town, showing that they were ready to stand for themselves. Mara felt her heart lift. The town was beginning to change, not because Caleb or she commanded it, but because humans, when shown courage, responded with courage of their own. Then came the syndicate envoys, hovering just outside the town. They had returned, hoping to intimidate, but they were met not with panic but with calm determination. The townspeople, inspired by Mara and Caleb, did not hide or retreat. Instead, they watched, ready to protect their choices, ready to assert that fear would no longer control them. Caleb stepped forward again. You see, they cannot control this town as long as humans remember to stand. You have a choice. You can be bystanders, or you can be part of something greater. Humans endure because they act, and because they choose to protect what is theirs. The syndicate envoys exchanged glances, realizing that their usual tactics of pressure and manipulation would not work here. The town had become something they could not easily dominate, not through fear, not through threats, but through the quiet strength of humans working together. Mara and Alara joined hands, standing beside Caleb. Together, they represented more than just survival. They represented the possibility that humans could rebuild what had been broken, reclaim what had been lost, and create a town that was more than just a place to live. It could be a community. By the end of the day, Dustfall Crossing had changed. It was not perfect. There was still fear, doubt, and uncertainty. But there was also courage, hope, and the knowledge that humans, when they choose to act, could shape their own destiny. Caleb, Mara, and Alara returned to the ranch that evening, tired but fulfilled. Mara looked at the horizon, where the sun dipped below the ridges, painting the desert in soft oranges and purples. The town below would face challenges, but it would also remember the lessons of courage, cooperation, and action. Alara turned to Mara. Do you think they'll really change? She asked. They will, Mara said confidently. Humans always remember those who act. They endure because of it. The frontier may be harsh, but we can teach people to be stronger than fear. Caleb smiled faintly. The frontier remembers. Humans remember. Dustfall Crossing will not forget today, and tomorrow they will begin to act for themselves, guided by what they have seen. As night fell over the desert, the ranch stood quietly against the horizon. The wind whispered through the scrub, carrying with it the memory of courage, the promise of human resilience, and the quiet knowledge that humans, when they choose to act, could change the course of their world. Mara lay on her bunk that night, thinking about the people of Dustfall Crossing. They had watched, hesitated, and finally moved. They had taken their first steps toward standing for themselves. And Mara, who had once felt powerless, now knew that humans could face fear, uncertainty, and oppression, and still find strength, wisdom, and hope within themselves. The desert night was vast, but it was also filled with promise. Humans endured because they adapted, they planned, and they acted when it mattered most. Caleb, Mara, and Alara had shown the town that, and the town had begun to remember. For the first time in a long while, Mara felt that the frontier was not just a place of isolation or danger. It was a place of possibility. And in that possibility, humans could thrive together, as they had always been meant to. The morning sun stretched over Dustfall Crossing, washing the town in gold and soft light. The streets that had once echoed with silence and fear were now filled with cautious movement. People emerged from their homes and shops, talking quietly, assessing the town and each other. There was a subtle sense of purpose in the air, a new rhythm forming where hesitation had once ruled. From the ridge above, Caleb, Mara, and Alara watched the town awaken. Caleb's ranch, just beyond the outskirts, stood as a quiet sentinel, its fences and solar panels glowing in the morning light. The syndicate hovercars were gone. Their envoys had retreated. They had not come with weapons, and they had not returned with threats. Instead, they had faced something they could not easily dominate, humans who were willing to act, to think, and to stand together. Mara turned to Caleb. "They're changing," she said softly. "I can see it." Caleb nodded, eyes on the town. "They will change." Humans always do when they realize courage is stronger than fear. Today, they've learned they have a choice. Alara smiled faintly. "It's strange to see hope where there was only fear." "Humans make their own hope," Caleb said, "even when the odds seem impossible." The three of them descended toward the town slowly, deliberately, not as conquerors but as guides. People noticed them as they approached, and the whispers began again, but this time there was no fear in the tone, only curiosity and cautious respect. In the center of the square, Mara saw the widow from before, the one who had been humiliated by the syndicate. She was speaking quietly with a group of neighbors, explaining how she had survived, how she had found help, and how she could now reclaim her dignity. Mara's heart lifted. The widow was no longer alone. Humans were beginning to gather together, learning from one another, ready to act as a community instead of remaining passive observers. Caleb stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly over the square. "People of Dustfall Crossing," he said, "you have a choice every day. You can let fear control you or you can take action. Today, you've chosen to act. You've chosen to stand together. That choice will shape the future of this town, and it will shape the people who live here." A few townspeople stepped forward, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. They began sharing ideas for organizing resources, for helping one another, and for ensuring that no one else would suffer in silence. Mara and Alara joined them, offering guidance and support. "This is what humans do," Mara said quietly to Alara. "We survive by helping each other, by using what we know, and by acting when it matters most." Alara nodded. "I see it now. That's why Caleb brought us here, not just to protect us, but to show the town that they can do the same." Caleb walked through the gathering crowd, his presence calm and steady. He didn't command or instruct, but his reputation, his actions, and the quiet strength he carried spoke louder than any words could. The people of Dustfall Crossing began to understand that humans could endure, adapt, and thrive, not by waiting for salvation, but by taking responsibility for themselves and for one another. By midday, the townspeople were actively organizing themselves. They repaired buildings, cleaned the streets, and shared resources. Small groups moved purposefully, discussing solutions to problems that had long seemed too difficult to face. Mara helped coordinate the water reclamation system, showing people how to maintain it and expand it for the benefit of all. Alara helped with supplies and logistics, ensuring that no one went without essentials. Caleb observed quietly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The ranch had taught them skills, but it had also taught them something more important. Courage, ingenuity, and cooperation were the foundations of human survival. As the day progressed, the syndicate's influence over the town became increasingly clear and increasingly irrelevant. Dustfall Crossing was no longer a place of fear and submission. It was becoming a place of agency and collective responsibility. The town's people were learning that they could defend themselves with knowledge, organization, and the simple act of choosing to act. Late in the afternoon, a representative from the syndicate arrived, but alone this time, with no hovercars, no backup. He approached cautiously, expecting resistance. Instead, he found a town alive with purpose, its people standing together quietly but firmly. Mara stepped forward, her presence calm and steady. "We are not here to fight," she said, "but we are not here to submit. The town is choosing its own path. If you wish to deal fairly, that's your choice. But if you seek intimidation, you will find only courage in return." The representative paused, sensing the change. Dustfall Crossing had become a town of humans who remembered courage and who were not afraid to act on it. He nodded slowly, perhaps realizing that the days of controlling people through fear and paperwork were over. He left quietly, without argument or threat. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert, Caleb, Mara, and Alara returned to the ranch. The town below was quieter now, but not in the old way of fear. It was quiet with purpose, people working in small groups, planning, rebuilding, and learning to trust their own judgment. Mara sat on the porch of the ranch house, looking out at the horizon. "Do you think they'll really keep this up?" she asked Caleb. "They will," Caleb said. "Humans always find a way. They endure because they choose to, and when they act together, there is nothing they cannot achieve." Alara leaned against the railing beside her. "It's amazing, seeing a town remember what humans can do," Mara nodded. "I never realized it before. Humans survive not just because we adapt, but because we care enough to act. That's what changes the world." The night came slowly, painting the desert with deep indigo and soft silver. Stars glimmered above, and the twin moons rose once more, casting their gentle glow over the ranch and the town. The wind whispered across the sands, carrying with it the memory of courage, the promise of human resilience, and the quiet knowledge that humans, when they choose to act, can reshape their world. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, watching the town. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "Dustfall Crossing will grow stronger. Humans will build more than homes. They will build communities. They will defend what is theirs, and they will help others when needed. That's what makes humans remarkable." Mara thought about her own journey, from Dustfall Crossing to the desert to Caleb's ranch. She had been alone, uncertain, and afraid. Now she was part of something larger, something meaningful. The frontier was harsh, but humans were stronger. They endured not because they were invincible, but because they acted when it mattered most. Alara smiled softly. "I think I understand now. Humans are capable of anything when we remember to stand together." "Yes," Caleb agreed, "and that is why we survive. That is why we endure. That is why the frontier, no matter how harsh, belongs to humans who refuse to give up." The night deepened, the desert calm and silent, yet filled with the promise of life, growth, and resilience. In the town below, humans were learning to stand, to rebuild, and to act with courage. On the ridge, the ranch stood as a quiet testament to what humans could achieve when they remembered their strength, their ingenuity, and their willingness to act. Mara and Alara returned to the bunkhouse, tired but fulfilled. They lay down under the thin blankets, listening to the soft hum of the desert night. For the first time in a long while, Mara felt truly safe, not just because the syndicate could not reach them, but because humans, including herself, had the courage to act, to endure, and to protect what mattered most. As she drifted toward sleep, Mara thought of Dustfall Crossing, the town below, and the humans who had finally begun to stand. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew this: humans survive, humans endure, and humans thrive, not because the world is easy, but because they choose to act when it matters most. Caleb stood outside for a while longer, looking at the desert stretching endlessly beyond the horizon. The ranch was quiet, the town below was alive with newfound purpose, and the night sky stretched vast and endless. He knew the frontier would always bring challenges, but he also knew the most important truth: humans endure because they act, and those who act inspire others to act as well. And as the twin moons shone above, the desert whispered a quiet promise: wherever humans are willing to stand, to think, and to help, there will always be hope, resilience, and the enduring power of humanity. The frontier remembered, and so did its people. Mara smiled in her sleep, comforted by the thought that she had played a part in something larger. The town would continue to grow, to protect one another, and to thrive because humans, strong, clever, and brave, had chosen to act. And somewhere, beyond the desert and the stars, Caleb, Mara, and Alara stood as proof that humanity, at its best, could face any challenge and endure.